I'm going to be focusing specifically on this really fast-growing solution space around data security platforms and specifically how we're working with financial services and fintech companies to leverage this technology. When I say fast growth, I do want to mention I was able to see some data from Gartner just this morning. It's not in the presentation, but it's really incredible just kind of the rate that they're seeing people reach out and ask about solutions like Satori and in the solution space. So really good time to be talking about this. Quick introduction to myself. I've been here at Satori almost as one of the founding account executives. Before that, I've been in customer-facing roles, working in data management, data governance, now data security. And if you're not familiar with data security and where things are going, it's important to understand that we've seen in most organizations, there's kind of been a shift where a lot of these security responsibilities are actually being pushed onto data platform, data engineering teams, right? People that own the data are being asked to make sure that it is compliant, it's secure, and it's fit for purpose for different business units. So any solution in the space needs to be tailored for that. And we do have a quote here in the bottom from one of our customers, Simple, one of Canada's largest fintechs. They've been using us for a number of years now, and they totally understand the vision even before they spoke to us, right? This idea that anything data security related needs to be an enabler for the business. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. People are going to find a way to go around it, right? So before we really get into that, I want to keep this focused on the topic today, and I want to highlight kind of the two major trends we see in discussions around data when we're talking to financial services and fintech. The first is kind of this understanding of, data as a competitive advantage to the business. And what comes with that is a desire to make sure that really everybody in the organization becomes a data consumer. They're enabled to use data and make data-driven decisions. In order to do that, the data needs to be timely, it needs to be complete, and it needs to be easy to discover so people can go and get as close to self-service data usage as possible. And finally, you need to have a platform and infrastructure in place that really enables teams to quickly build impactful products that doesn't carry a large operational burden where you have, teams kind of supporting ad hoc requests and, not able to focus on more strategic work. On the other side of that also is kind of a growing interest in just minimizing data-related risks for the business. Obviously, when you're talking about financials, you're talking about a ever-increasing amount of PII and financial data that needs to be available only on a need-to-know basis, so that's not being accidentally exposed. You have constantly expanding and newly introduced regulations that carry with them large fines that can be very impactful to the business. And of course, as you bring on more technologies, as you invest more in solutions in the cloud, you're now expanding greatly kind of your risk service. And you need to have a strategy in place to keep that in control as well. On top of these trends, there's also considerations for this industry that are important to understand. When you're dealing with large financial services, probably the most obvious thing is that you have a very large and diverse data footprint that comes from legacy systems. A lot of these organizations have been using mainframe for decades. But that also comes through acquisitions where you have new technology being introduced that you need to quickly integrate and make compliant within your own organization. With that, there's definitely some upward pressure for these organizations, new tech-focused companies coming in, creating innovative products, and as a large enterprise, you need to be able to respond quickly and keep up with that innovation. And of course, the larger of your organization, you're operating in multiple geographies, you're navigating a number of complex regulations that you need to be able to adapt to. And then more focused specifically on what we see for kind of the fast growth fintech, right? Is, as you become more successful, as your, niche in the industry expands, you start to face greater scrutiny and you need to start applying controls that you might have been able to get away with kind of not focusing on originally. Of course, younger companies, there's always limited headcount and resources to go around. So efficiency, automation is very key. And delays are very hard to tolerate here, right? You need to be out there quickly providing solutions for customers and expanding your customer base. So what we've seen typically is organizations have struggled as they're trying to utilize investments in data where they kind of have difficulty balancing the security and productivity aspects of the business. One side that this is maybe more comparable to what we see in fintech is they've operated on this model of high risk, but everybody gets access to data so they can enable new exciting usages of that data. Obviously, that carries a tremendous amount of risk, especially as your organization grows and you don't have as much day-to-day insight into how people are working. but also the other side where very security conscious organizations that have dedicated a lot of time and resources to solving these problems. But as a result, with more controls in place, you see delays in products onboarding. Some projects never get off the ground because they can't meet those hurdles required. You never end up realizing that kind of investment in data, and you end up kind of a little bit of a hamster wheel of security. So getting into what we do, the first step was really to figure out, okay, why are companies struggling to balance these two? And the thing that becomes apparent is there's a pretty big blind spot for most organizations in what goes on in getting access to data, right? It's not so simple as just, writing a grant statement and saying, okay, go ahead, connect to our data. There's all these checks that have to go through around, okay, what should this person be able to see based on their role? What's relevant to them? How do we manage that? So as people change roles or change duties over time, their permissions change with them. How do we make sure that access is compliant and is able to, quickly be audited on, so we don't have to spend a lot of time every year on going through, okay, who had access to what were they doing, why were they given that access? And then, of course, the evolving security requirements. How do we make sure we're not exposing PII or sensitive data? How do we make sure that if a breach does happen, we can quickly minimize the risk of that and understand what happened in the organization? And this is multi-team work. And it's work that sometimes lacks clear ownership, which is never a great thing when you're trying to be strategic as a business. So that's where in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of solutions like Satori. There are some others out there, mostly all startups that are responding to this need for a data security platform, something that will allow you to manage access to data in the same way that companies have traditionally managed access to business applications, right? So kind of like an Okta for data is what a lot of companies are trying to build. And those solutions come in a lot of flavors, but typically they're focused on those three big components. How do we manage access efficiently? How do we use this solution to respond to compliance requirements? And how do we make it as secure as possible without impeding our ability to work with data? And that's where Satori has really thrived, is working with those data teams and building a solution that responds to their specific interests, right? So Satori is focused on building a solution that is truly deploy anywhere. You can leverage a Satori hosted or self-hosted solution to kind of meet higher security and compliance requirements. And we want to create an experience where each user has a very customized and specific access to data, right? They have the data they need to do their job, but no more, no less. And it's all handled transparently from the data layer, right? So if we talk about organizations that have Snowflake, Redshift, Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server. Traditionally, it's been a struggle to manage security on every single instance and across every application. So what we built is really this approach that is totally separate from the data layer and sits transparently within the organization. You can think of it kind of like a data firewall in the sense that as people are accessing data across the organization, we are able to control and monitor that without making changes to the underlying data infrastructure or creating fake data. So kind of what that process looks like is, as people access data, Satori confirms if you've set up approval for them to access that data. We are tagging and classifying sensitive data in real time, applying masking and redaction and filtering around that data based on those tags, but also based on the user's roles and attributes that you are maintaining within typically your IAM solution. We monitor all that activity and permissions over time, so you can quickly audit on that and get visibility into abnormal behavior. But also, we want to focus on the end user experience, right? How do we make it as easy as possible for companies to find and get access to data? So with that comes self-service, as well as kind of one-click approval that can be set up through a ticketing system, through something like Slack, or even just directly within our own solution, which is the Satori Data Portal. And of course, one of the big things we see companies do, and is fully supported by Satori, is this concept of temporary or just-in-time access to data, right? So instead of giving people broad and persistent access, you can now put controls into place on, something that needs to be reviewed every 90 days or something that is only the length of a specific project. And those can be tiered. So we have one customer in the technology space that leverages this to say, okay, everybody gets blanket access to data, but it's going to be fully redacted. No sensitive data will ever be exposed. But with Satori, you can go and request elevated access to data. So those are just some of the cool ways companies are leveraging Satori. There are a lot of solutions out here in a growing number. So I do want to highlight kind of the three main reasons why companies have typically worked with Satori. One is because we have one of the largest lists of supported data sources. So if you need to capture all of your relevant data across production analytics, big data environments, Satori is a great solution to get that all in one single pane of glass. We also kind of prioritize and highlight the speed at which we can deploy and make an impact, right? You can get value out of Satori from the initial deployment of it in terms of auditing and monitoring. That's very rare in this space. A lot of companies do require 6 to 12 months to kind of get their solution up and running. And that's an area where we've had a lot of success. And also just, we've been doing this for longer than most companies in the space. So we do have a framework that we are quite proud of on where we've seen companies leverage best practices, get the most value and immediate success out of kind of these data enablement and data security projects. I won't take too much time on this, but just highlighting when I talk about moving fast is, our typical span from initial deployment to fully operational is about 6 weeks. I did mention that, within the first week, you will start getting value out of Satori from building kind of our data catalog experience and activity monitoring. And from there, it's just about configuring policies around, who should have access to what data and how do you want to set up workflows for people to find and get that access. So I'll kind of cut it short there. I'm not going to go into giving a demo today, but I do believe the products speak well for itself. So what I would recommend if you're interested is, we're happy to do any kind of tailored demo experience, but we also have a test drive available online, which will set you up with some sandbox environments. And it's totally self-guided, so you can try and use out our full SaaS product and try it for yourself. So with that, thank you for the time. I'll take any questions if there are.